Apparently, we're live on Facebook for sure. Welcome to the Tuning Fork on Facebook and YouTube. Thank you for joining us. This is John Halpern and Emily Harris from Wilmington, North Carolina. This is the Nomadic Institute of Cultural Activism International. And our guest today is Patrick Meagher. If you just excuse me for a moment, we have an echo in the room, and I'm wondering if that's Sally Harris downstairs. And we have a number of folks here. Thanks for showing up, everyone. It's so exciting to see you, Pia. The beams overhead, Pia, is that the new place? Are you in, can't hear you. You're muted.
This is my studio finally done.
Okay, marvelous. That's so phenomenal, exciting.
I know.
So Pia is in a studio. Patrick, at the top of a mountain on a dirt road at the end of the dirt road. And
yeah, I know the area.
Patrick, yeah. where are you? I just talked with Anna, and she said that you are going to do a space up here somewhere.
Yeah, we're not far in Lexington. It's also in the mountains, about 1,000 feet up, and it's near Hunter, about 7 miles from Hunter Mountain. So it's like ski country. It's like in the middle of a state park.
So nice. Yeah, Lexington. Actually, David Bowie had his farm there, and I think he died there even.
Oh, really? Wow,
yeah.
That's amazing. I think Dan will be really excited to know that. One of our teammates who likes Bowie a lot. I'll let him know.
Well, if this is the 15th show that we've had since the beginning of our program, the inception in September of 2020, and this is our second show in 2021. We're really, really thrilled and grateful, and having a lot of fun with Patrick setting this program up today. And we're really, Emily and I, speaking for Emily as well, we're just so excited to have everyone here. We came down last night after a 9-hour drive to Wilmington, North Carolina, and we're being hosted by Emily's family, Sally and Pete Harris. Sally's downstairs, and her tag name there is P. Harris, and that's Pete Harris's computer. Of course, the idea of the Tuning Fork is a kind of intervention or disruption in what has been a very disruptive period for most of the world in the last 11 months. Emily and I conceived of this experience as a way of social gathering and sort of addressing what she and I have felt as a kind of hunger for community gathering, and not simply gathering, but gathering with a sort of intended or wished outcome from a cultural assembly or cultural congregation, that there would be some impact in the world from this congregation of people. Now, that may sound very normal in terms of most public or community gatherings. We all know that there are all kinds of public assemblies, but when one adds the cultural sort of sensibility to it, the cultural expression to it, that is in itself inclusive of a vision for society, a new vision, or an analysis of social change, ecologic change, some manner of conveying, transmitting the sort of contagious creative spirit, humor, energy, vision that is possible through participatory art and interactive art and the kind of disruptions that artists are capable of that engage us in the present moment, in the here and now, and interconnected in an interconnective way with each other and with the world. And Patrick's been working in this realm for quite a long time. And we're going to hear from Patrick a little bit, I hope, about some of your personal experiences, Patrick. And I'm very curious at the moment why it is that you decided to take the path of a cultural producer to begin with. What sort of influences or trends or directions sent you here? And I know that you and Emily have coordinated a screen sharing program, which is in about 12 or 13 units. Is that correct? So we have a sort of a narrative thread visually through our conversation. So you and Emily feel free to speak with each other, signal each other in terms of screen sharing. And I'm going to be working the camera view for the recording during our session so that everybody in the program will be pinned visually, and we'll have a sort of cameo portrait a few times during the show as we're running through the conversation with Patrick and his images. So people will casually be coming in, Patrick, and now we have about 20 people, I believe, at least, not to mention friends on Facebook Live and YouTube. So here we go. Patrick, can you please respond to my first sort of question?
Sure. Well, first, thanks for inviting me to your web show. It's quite a bit of work to put a weekly episode together, and it's already been really exciting to participate. And I think it's worth mentioning what we said before, that with the sort of crashing of the 20th century wave, we're kind of just rebuilding, and this kind of experimental lo-fi production is kind of really where I think we can get some good conversations going and figure out what's important to do next. So thanks for the opportunity and setting that up for all of us.
Well, Patrick, we're very lucky to be down here. You guys everyone's in a different place in the world right now. And thank you. The view in one of our cameras, this camera over here, if you can see my finger, that camera is what I'm looking at when I look past my laptop, which is here. So we are on the east coast of the American continent, and we're in the state of North Carolina. And on the way down, Patrick, you might imagine that wherever we went, there were people wearing masks in toll booths. So this plague is quite real. And, it's not just a virtual event. Anyway, Patrick, so what was it that sort of induced you, or how was it your cognitive process of sort of determining to become or to work in the world of cultural production? A little bit about that, please.
I thought about it in a way that I've always been working on the same three things since I was a child, and that was doing visual art, writing, some sort of writing or poetry, and then co-organizing some type of clubhouse. And so those three endeavors have kind of been the backbone for me, or a triangle base from which I've done my work. And then the context, has shifted from the neighborhood I grew up in Manhattan to wherever I was working, and then what was happening at the time. And I think when we started feeling like this wave was crashing at the height in the mid-noughts, it seemed like it was a good time to start pivoting and figuring out how do we work together in a more community-based way. And I think that's when my work became a little bit more activist and collective and locally organized.
What do you mean by the clubhouse? What's the spirit of that clubhouse idea?
I mean, I think that was the fun part, right? But we when we were kids, we built a couple of ramshackle clubhouses on some empty space behind the building where I grew up. And I grew up in a high rise, so I was on the 14th floor, and so it was nice to be down amongst the trees and hang out there as a kid. So we weren't supposed to be there, so we had to kind of be sly about it and kind of hide it into the landscape. So we'd set it up for summer and hang out in it, and then it would usually be like removed in autumn when the trees revealed it. So it became like a process, and then because we had to rebuild it, it would improve each time and expand, and I think that's that impetus is what's happening now upstate in Lexington, where we're team building for a whole new set of artistic spaces for production and play and exhibition.
Yeah. So would you say that this is sort of a virtual clubhouse right here today for your
this is your clubhouse, and thanks for inviting me.
Well, we need to be together, and this is a way of remaining in the space of a tuning fork of your sort of sensibility and sort of in some way resonating with what it is you're doing. And we thank you for sort of giving us the gift of ingesting your work and how it will change us and how it will help us to navigate what we're doing better too. Why don't you go ahead with what you and Emily have set up to do and tell us what we're looking at.
Sure. So I think we're starting with my paintings, which is funny because sometimes I don't really think of myself as a painter, but I guess fundamentally as a visual artist, I started with painting. I work a lot with photo and also with sculpture, and I think I've exhibited mostly photo-based works, but the painting has always been the backbone. And recently I was moving around a lot, so I started trying to figure out some portable concepts. And a couple of years ago, when I was traveling in Italy, I made a series called Tuscan Scrolls, and they were 8 foot long, 12 by 96 inch paintings, horizontal scroll paintings on rice paper. And so I could just roll them up at the end and put them in my suitcase.
So as I know a little bit about your intentions and motivations, Patrick, does this work sort of include the idea of a kind of a portal for going into our own sort of, interconnectivity with the world and sort of looking at our obstacles to that interconnectivity, some contemplative, meditative space?
Yes, that the drawings come out of a long process of meditative mark making, whereby I kind of discovered along the way that the marks would turn into different symbols. And after many years, saw that it was a vocabulary of landscape motifs, and then expanded upon that. And now there's about, I think, 111 different icons. One just popped up earlier this year, which was really exciting because it doesn't happen very often nowadays. But it has always been kind of a meditative process from that mark making to the paintings, and then exporting them into 3D sculpture, and then understanding it from a bodily perspective as a kind of walking meditation. And then later, in studio, we were kind of developing how those pieces might place make. And a couple of years ago, I woke up with a poem in my head that connected 26 sculptures that I'd made over the last decade or so. And it was kind of a wonderful moment of having a certain clarity around what I was doing and being able to see a larger picture come into place. And I'd always wanted to make a park with some of these works, and I'd studied, my graduate work was to do public art. And so that had taken a bit of a turn after school, and going back to that point has been the mission since. And
Patrick, it just occurs to me that, you know, a great influence of mine, someone I admired a great deal, Vito Akanchi, did so much sort of conceptual performative artwork. And the later part of his life, he started making sort of public architectural works. And I'm wondering if, you know, you knew anything about Vito, or if you see any correlation.
I love his work, and he's a great guy. I interviewed to work at his studio at one point, so I got to meet him. And he sort of dangerously smoked like 5 cigarettes during our half-an-hour meeting, and I was worried for him. But his work involving humor and space and architecture, and then even kind of divesting himself from what he might refer to as like the shackles of the art world to go into design as a more liberated space, was sort of an interesting take, because I also kind of, you know, felt that I was between worlds and trying to create one in between, whether it was with drawing or sculpture or later with virtual reality.
So there's this kind of sensation, Patrick, when I look at the image that Emily just shared, and I look at this image now, these sort of objects on the rooftop, there's almost a sense that I've entered that two-dimensional world, and I've sort of gone through some portal, and I'm now on top of a roof, maybe in Manhattan, sort of as though I'm living inside of your drawing.
Thanks. Yeah, those sculptures in particular were exactly what I was saying. Like, they came out of the drawings. There were very simple symbols, but then when they were rendered first in foam, you could already feel that there was a visceral activity where you'd walk around the sculpture and your body would start to activate as if you were in a landscape. You were cued into it by the shape and the height, and it actually didn't matter if it was an adult or a child, or it was still sort of proportional to maybe the landscape memory that we have as sort of the quasi-universal icon of plant life. And then later, when they were produced as powder-coated steel, they had a little bit more physical presence to be viewed, but they physically still felt the same way and triggered that sort of innate response. And a collector who has a set of 5 in her home said that when she would walk through the garden that she had set up with them, it was always like a feeling of going into nature, even though she was home. So it was a kind of a portal for her to enter her own space, and also to exit through and bring that kind of mood into her day. So when she moved, she would set them up in their new apartments, and she kind of proved the concept, which was really great to see. So we kind of learned through the whole process from start to finish.
Now, I just want to mention that our friend and colleague Pia Dene is here, and Pia will be on the show, I think, in a few months, related to some work that she's doing upstate in New York State. And you're also doing work in upstate New York. Is this an opportune moment to discuss a little bit how the work you're doing in Lexington, New York, is not only a clubhouse type of experience and process, but also one of these immersive kinds of, experiences with a walk through sort of labyrinth or aesthetic kind of field.
Yeah, that was the magic of Lexington coming together for this collaboration there, because there was an available plot of land that was seemingly perfect for the project. And so that'll be the 3rd iteration of the landscape garden for Lineland. We're just moving one out of a beta test out of Ithaca, and then setting it up on the coast on an island in Connecticut. And then we'll be bringing it to Lexington for a more public launch. So we're still iterating it, but it's really exciting to work through it and get a sense that the site really informs the project. And having a permanent home for this sculpture has been a dream. So this is an amazing step in the work. And thanks to Mary Kaplan, who's the philanthropist who I partner with on the project, who had the vision to purchase this set of 7 properties a number of years ago when they were derelict, and she ensured that they would be saved for the arts. So, and there are other great neighbors in the area, like Lexington Art Science. Alex Rodriguez has another set of 6 properties. So together, we have a very interesting collaboration that is just unfolding. And that's been really quite a pleasure.
Well, I'm just scrolling through our attendees here, and I want everyone to recognize that while Patrick and I have a sort of narrative that we're presenting and exploring together for 60 minutes, after that time, we open the doors up, so to speak, for other people to comment or ask questions of Patrick, and comment about anything really. It seems peculiar somehow, Patrick, that the Lexington experience has sort of erupted as a sort of very positive symptom or response to the COVID pandemonium. What can you say about that?
You know, it's been a wonderful set of happenstance or kismet circumstances from the beginning. I mean, it's actually thanks to you, John, for introducing me to Mary. And
well, just take a little break and back up for a second, because I believe Alex Rodriguez has just entered the conversation, technically in the Zoom meeting just now. So why don't you just back up a little bit and intro the topic you're going into now, Patrick, and thank you for acknowledging our
I was just talking about how we ended up in Lexington and what we're starting to envision together up there, and how we both sort of had this good timing to be out of the city and have a place to work on during this frightening chapter in world affairs. And that the camaraderie that we already have underway has been really a great counterpoint to being in the city, despite the snow these days. So
in terms of the sort of unfortunate context of COVID, this is a rather positive, productive, perhaps a healing kind of process and opportunity upstate in Lexington. Can you speak a little bit to that topic?
Yeah, I mean, I see it as part of that crashing wave that, you know, people came into the city and then it kind of like almost boiled over, and then through various factors of the economy and COVID, people went and spread out a little bit, and will help kind of create smaller pockets and reinvigorate some local communities that might have felt a little disconnected or remote, or and also ones that are just happy the way they are. But in this case, you know, it was there's an area where there's not a lot of economic activity. There's only a post office in the town, and so we feel like we can be stewards of a larger project of revitalizing this area that has a lot of art history going back decades through a theater company. I mean, Alex knows more of the history of the area. I'm just beginning to learn more about it.
Hey, Patrick, how important is the Lexington project as a focus for you over the next 6 months or a year?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, you know, the culmination of many projects. So we're vigorously team building for that right now, and there's a lot of potential for that project to grow, especially as it gets warmer. So we did the first step of just stabilizing properties and then renovating them so that they're usable, and we're getting to that place right now where we can do a bit more there. Like that one event that we did together at Alex's place was a great test of more to come.
You mean the one that included my stuff.
Yeah, that you were the star of that show.
I'll just contextualize that. I wanted to note Mary Kaplan's great presence in the work that Emily and I are doing, particularly with the film Touch the Sky, and also to somehow supercharge a little bit the Lexington kickoff as a sort of social process that was occurring. So last October, we presented a film about Joseph Beuys that I made with Joseph Beuys, and also we had something called Utopian Scenarios, which was a short performance work that I'm developing, and so that was a kind of performance sketch, which I also had on Roxbury Radio about a month earlier on the Evening Tickler on Sunday evening. So that's with Steve Burnett. And I think you guys, Alex and Patrick, we should all connect with Steve Burnett, who's a farmer and an artist in Bovina, which is very near Pia in Andes, New York. And it's really somehow invigorating to get some attention going into this area. Sorry, Pia, I missed.
Great guy. Yes.
Yeah. So, okay. So Emily and Patrick, are we moving on with the slides? And Patrick, are you narrating a little bit what's coming up?
Sure.
Please continue. Thank you.
Emily, you're going to share that screen?
We have a kind of double portrait here. Now it's gone. And now it's back. Can you see that, Patrick?
Yeah, maybe just go 2 slides back.
2 slides back. Back to Manhattan?
Let's see. Oh no, that's fine. Okay, well, we were talking about this piece, right? So this is a whole other series, but this is my portrait series I started a few years ago. It actually is part of the wellness part of my work. There's a healing modality, which is just a set of literally 7 questions that allow someone to work through a problem, usually like an unconscious belief system. And what we do is we talk through that problem. It takes about an hour, and after we've gotten to the point of conclusion, we take the portraits. So usually the person is in a more relaxed state and may or may not have had an epiphany, but the mood is usually like pretty bright, and then I ask them to send in 5 or 6 of their favorite emojis and create this 2-foot square artwork or smaller rectangular work, which the idea is that the artwork is a dynamic conveyor of that mood and a sense of self, in that we are kind of forced to portray on a daily basis on social media and perform in public, but that we have this battery of an image that allows us to reconnect with that sort of happy place, and remind us of at least of a grounding, empowering moment in time when we have that connection during the portrait session.
So, okay, we're seeing a series of these images, and this is a sort of really compelling, fascinating process, Patrick. And so it feels as though you're almost working as a kind of a medium in some way to help people navigate this inner kind of experience with themselves.
I mean, I study the methodology. I'm by no means an expert, so sometimes I can't actually bring the person through to the final conclusion of the session, because it can be very difficult. It can be very emotional, and sometimes we can see that there's a sort of a knot of problems. But without getting too technical, when we start the process, I ask the sitter to send a number of of photos of things that they love and their favorite emojis, as I mentioned, and then and that gets collaged into this work that in the end is sort of again this emotional energetic battery, and I'm hoping that people would like want to put them by their door or above their computer where they Zoom or something, where they will feel reinvigorated by that moment on a regular basis, and that we think of art as a transformative experience and not just a decorative motif in the home.
So this is a kind of placeholder for these folks to sort of refer to or reference when they're in their space, when they're leaving their space, going into the world. They put these objects near their doors. They're kind of like reflections, reflectors, placeholders, tuning forks, if you will, for helping them to resonate in that sensation, which may have a sort of breakout, epiphanistic, a kind of insight that can be helpful for them in their lives. Is that right?
Yeah, like a souvenir of a self, and understanding that that's an active act, or that the understanding of the self or the healing of trauma is part of both our like internal world and also like our placemaking with the larger world together. So that's a full sentence.
So how does this sort of translate or evolve into other work that you're doing in terms of, the sort of, visual portals that you create, 2-dimensional and then 3-dimensional? How does this correlate, this sort of work? What's the sort of...
I think this piece is a culmination of a number of pieces that come out of the clubhouse making that I spoke about before. By having, I created this house that I found, which had 6 bedrooms, and it was this house on a roof, and it was basically a ramshackle shed with broken windows full of trash. But it became this arts clubhouse over many years, and about 100 people lived there, and that was quite a learning experience. It's a lot of different subjectivities, a lot of different backgrounds, languages, people from all over the world, and it was super illuminating. I grew up in that type of environment in Manhattan, so it was sort of familiar, but at the same time, that basis I think allowed me to understand a further depth of both human similarity and differences. So I did a lot of work exploring like consciousness, psychology, and kind of basic like mind state as a kind of extension of what I think prior work had happened in the art world, looking into the minimalism of form. And I think Matt Mulliken, who's a few years older than me, was starting to look into early virtual reality and early psychological states. Like he would hypnotize himself and then make drawings while in that state of hypnosis. And he had made a lexicon that was based on international symbols. And so I think I was ending up pushing into more of a landscape space and into another part of the interiority, which is not the subconscious of the hypnosis state, but are kind of our underlying belief systems that are in our unconscious, that are still very real and shape our lives every day. They become sort of parameters by which we live. And sometimes, we never really understand that is going on in the background. So learning that, having the opportunity to be shown that through friends who were involved in both dance and psychology was a huge opening up of a larger chapter of my work. And now that's all blending in the kind of healing project of the sculpture garden.
Patrick, the other day when we were speaking, you mentioned something about Joseph Beuys. And I wondered what it was that you were conveying to me, and if we could revisit that for a moment, and what it is that you feel as, art can have a very subversive kind of effect and outcome, whether by intention or not. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit about the inner subversive desire of the work that you're doing, both in these sorts of more studio kind of work and in the more sort of expansive public space kind of work.
Yeah, that's a lot at once, but it's a lovely tangle, and that's actually, it's good to note, like, that's how we know each other, through your film Untitled Boys, which I saw and bought a DVD of many years ago, and had the pleasure of seeing again recently. But I think what we share in that understanding is both from the performance to the metaphysical underpinnings of his work, and how he his own mental transformation of kind of routing out his trauma and the sort of evils of the society that he lived in are a model for social growth in different areas in many places. We're also kind of dealing with large, hopefully never as horrific, but shifts where art can help growth of the society through illuminating the self and reconnecting to the landscape, and other motifs that Boyce explored in his work.
Patrick, when we met, actually, I was giving a little introduction to a film about Joseph Beuys at the Film Forum in New York City. And it happened that that moment in my life was just when I was sort of, in a way, expanding from a very contracted, traumatic experience I had. And I find it very, relevant that you and I would meet at that moment, both in my personal life, and wondering, for your own traumas, how is it that you have sort of gained some sort of language that makes you more empathetic and more sensitive and insightful of working in the public realm, and also in the interpersonal realm through your work?
Well, Emily just had up a slide. You can go to that one. It's that's the clubhouse where we were before, here on the Bowery downtown, and I mean, that's the least interesting part of the building, but it shows the context of really how it was, in the middle of that kind of nomad area. And
what can you just recite to us what it is that we're seeing here in words and letters? What this is about?
This was a breakthrough moment for the Silver Shed organization. Our collaborative had been producing events for 3 years, roughly 5 years at that point, and then we ended up on the cover of Art Review magazine, which is probably the largest British art magazine, one of the top 3 in the world, and it was sort of like a windfall, which also then sort of alerted the authorities that we were there on this roof and doing art events with hundreds of people, and so we eventually got shut down. But that turned out to be a good thing, because it was basically about 9 years of freedom on this roof, and it met so many great people, and we had so many events, and we had basically an open door policy. At one point, we didn't lock the door for a few years, and people who just knew where the elevator was and how to get up and who to call could just find their way up, or we'd give people keys. And then
so in itself subversive, just in its sort of function, the way it operated.
Right, just take the whole fear out of there. Like at one point, we realized, like, we're not really keeping anything of value. Like, the value is the people here and their relationships, and so we're not worried about stuff and being distant. We're interested in connectiveness and warmth and community and sharing and that interaction that can lead to new things. So we basically had a yes to everything policy at one point, where we did 3 shows to set it off, and then we just took proposals from friends who wanted to use the space, And then we just cleaned up bit by bit parts of the living room. One day we cut a 9-foot square hole in the wall between my storage space and the living room to create a larger gallery, and then create the circulation that would go from rooftop to rooftop, the front door and the side door. And so that's kind of like a metaphor for how like the project expanded, that we just basically started organically and then expanded the program in the space, eventually getting into publishing some theory that came from those conversations late at night, that eventually got some notes, so forth. So
it seems a little bit like a kind of curating of anarchy. It's a sort of, sculpted or curated anarchy. What do you think about that idea?
Yeah, I mean, there's a good side to that, right? There was the notion, Hakim Bey wrote a book called The Temporary Autonomous Zone, and talked about how you can have these spaces where creativity can be operating in a living way, as opposed to the fabrication of documents thereof, or again, like artistic souvenirs. And I was interested in Edward Soja's theory of third space, and about creating, what's not a gallery in a commercial sense, and what's not a nonprofit in a more formalized sense. What does the art collective do? And that led us to our next project, which Emily can advance to the next slide.
So Patrick, I just want to introduce a comment from our friend Nikki Ledger, who just says that book was distributed in Zuccotti Park! ! Were you aware of that?
Oh, which book?
Which book, Nikki? She'll comment back. Taz, T-A-Z.
Oh, right, yeah. I mean, it's it's kind of a seminal book for both activists, artists, and social theorists who were interested, I'd say, maybe fundamentally, in l'esprit de cité, like the idea of what happens in a public space, or what happens in a city, the spirit of like minds gathering, and that kind of like that special thing that can both happen in positive and negative ways on the internet, like right now. Yeah, it's been a while since I read it, but I remember I gave away copies of it as gifts, because I thought it was so important at the time, and I still highly recommend it.
Patrick, you're going to talk about this next image, and I just wanted to reserve some space also for this idea of trauma, and how trauma can be perceived sort of as either a kind of aggressive burden, or a kind of opportunity for process of evolution in some way. Could you speak to that idea a little bit, and how, like, I've known you, Patrick, if you don't mind me saying, in moments when you've had personal disappointments, sadness, in love, painful times, and I know you to be a very receptive person to the dark side and its benefits.
Yeah, it's a bit of a yin and yang, isn't it? And yeah, and a few times.
Well, it is a bit of a yin and yang, and it's also not. From the perspective of continuity, and balance. There's this idea that it's also a thing of life, having all of these qualities, and who are we to judge whether it's negative or positive? But we are the arbiters of how to work with those traumas, and how to respond and integrate them, and in some way maybe transform them into a language that can be beneficial to other people.
Right, and even just the energies itself. Like I think for both of my parents being nurses and coming from that way of being in the world, I think that's translated in a way into my work. And then on my father's side, there's a more musical and lyrical, poetic. He was a writer and a poet, And then on the other side were some religious activists. So I think I kind of fell in between the genetic pool there. And I mean, to what you were saying about, sort of lost my train of thought there, but I wanted to reference, I guess I started thinking about the memories of the experiences we had, and some of those troubles. But yeah, it's about transforming those lessons, right? And finding means by which to create meaning. And art has been, is exalted as a means to fight despair and to create a sense of being in the world and a continuity with our ancestry and the places that we want to go. And with the day after Martin Luther King Day, that might be something to think about as far as how do we activate art in the service of humanity and the things we hold dear.
Thanks, Patrick. By the way, you have quite a number of friends, I think, here. I don't know if you can see everyone who's on the show. Jimmy Tran, Alex and Pau and Colleen, Ed, Betty, or Beatty, our good friend Gordon Skinner that you have met from time to time, Patricia Stein, Eileen Mislove, Jordan Balaz. Anything you'd like to say to these folks in the midst of all this?
For tuning in. I know it's sometimes I think art talk can be a bit esoteric for people, but it's actually rooted in really simple things that I think we all share and value.
Well, we're trying to make that kind of accessible and provide useful tools. And by the way, this show will be on our website, the Institute for Cultural Activism International.org, along with a battery of information and archives, other shows. For example, we're going to produce a section called The Sanctuary, kind of a space where people can enter that space and just inhabit the sort of qualities that artists want people to have through their experiences. And that was a conversation we had with during Anne Waldman's show with Meredith Monk, who, without our prompting her, actually spoke about the need, the thirst for experiences like that, virtual experiences. So I hope, Patrick, that you and I and Emily can talk more in the future about how to develop more sort of virtual sanctuaries and some of the scholastic aspects of the Institute and the tuning fork. So thank you for allowing me that moment of commercial interruption.
Yeah, no, we appreciate the format.
Right. Collective show in a looks like an interior.
Yeah. Here's one shot, and Emily, you can queue up the other PDF for that if you want, just to show a little bit more of the work there. This was like a project that came out of collaboration with two other collectives.
Wow.
At the Silver Shed, and then we produced basically an open source format to do a collective of collectives exhibition. So we had about 3 or 4 dozen independent groups. We did the first one in New York, and then at Los Angeles, and then we thought we'd go south all the way down to Mexico City. And 3 shows ended up being produced in Mexico City, which were wonderful. This was the second show, and at Casa Mawad in DF, and the coming together of all these very different neighborhoods and very different groups of people who may have not known each other was part of the plan to basically see if we can form a space of a kind of a open-ended urban university of interaction and discourse, and mix up these groups that maybe were separated by a highway or a borough, and just see like who's out there, get a litmus of the time, who's working, who's starting, who's ready to do something new, who's starting a new publication. So that was the general inspiration for Collective Show. and we turned that into our first 501c3 proper charity, and then open source the idea after a few years, because it was actually an incredible amount of work to do as a volunteer project. But the idea was that basically people had the impetus, they could use the manual and set up a show wherever they wanted in the world. So at some point, we were supposed to publish it and distribute the manual in another book, which is still in progress. I don't know, I have like a half a dozen books that are somewhere like 85 to 100%, 90% ready. So,
all right. Are we going to get to the Warhol Project too, Patrick?
Oh yeah, that you can, yeah, go to the next slide, back to the slides if you will, Emily. So,
wow, there's a lot of material here that we're not getting into yet. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, you can go backwards from here. This is a book that I've been working on for 10 years about Andy Warhol, and
why?
I went to Carnegie Mellon to study him initially. I you know, even before all the hype in the 90s, I thought this is a singular American voice that connects so many important things about American society today. And so I was doing my own research and taking notes. And at a certain point, I thought, oh, I have a thesis for a book. It's basically a dozen points about why his work is so valuable to the growth of global society, and how he really represents sort of the pinnacle of the end of 20th century thought and opens up a whole new chapter with digital art.
Well, if you don't mind me interrupting you, Patrick, and forgive me, but do you see Andy Warhol as a kind of cultural activist in some way, or a social sculptor?
Well, absolutely.
Well, can you elucidate that a little bit, please?
The American Joseph Beuys, and Joseph Beuys was the German Warhol, right? That was how they were spoken of at the time.
Well, I think that needs a little bit more content or narrative. In what way do you see Warhol as having been sort of accountable for dealing with society and the areas of society he felt were, in need of healing or fixing or changing?
I mean, it's so funny that right now Warhol is so well distributed and his ideas are so normalized that we forget that he was incredibly radical and subversive and brave at the time of being an openly gay artist in a time when that really wasn't even discussed.
Well, so, I never heard that Andy Warhol was gay, and I heard about it privately from his lovers, but he was publicly self-described as asexual. So I don't know how you came to this.
I guess the proper word would be queer, but or the general overarching term. But I mean, he did have a live-in, more or less, husband. So but that's just one of the points. The point is that now we think of that as normal. At the time, it was a major hurdle for him to overcome. And in his work, he had a series called Ladies and Gentlemen, which was a coy depiction of transgendered and cross-dressing friends and people in the community. And that series, circulated around the world and brought visibility to people who had probably never had a portrait circulate in museums. And again, we take that for granted today because of trans awareness and just the general kind of Americanisms that we now take as kind of global culture. But
I visited the studio. I visited Warhol's factory when I was about 15, and I interviewed Fred Hughes, who was publisher of Interview magazine at the time. Yeah. And I wanted to talk about censorship, and I did. I have recordings somewhere of this conversation. But I was there, and Jane Forth was there at the time, and I met Bob Colacello. It seemed like there was a sort of a community of LGBTQ people, and it was a safe haven for these people to sort of nurture and support their sort of, it was a subculture at that time. So absolutely. You're absolutely right.
And and also a kind of a beginning of an American culture that was detethered to some extent from the European standard or the European aristocratic social model, which took a very long time, I think, to really globalize. But Andy Warhol's work depicted, the beginning of that global world of people from all over the world, and then bringing the Hollywood set into a new social model as opposed to the original, the existing social hierarchies. So that in and of itself was very radical. And then there were his own superstars, which were kind of like a local level of that type of fame and self-representation.
On the drive down from New York yesterday, Emily and I listened to a broadcast on Fresh Air on radio with Fran Lebowitz, who described the people around Warhol as sort of having the license to self-destruct through the drug, use and abuse. And she just saw people, jumping over the cliff into the abyss of their own mortality so frequently that she was very critical about Warhol's sort of creative exploitation of these types of people. So it's interesting. It's important, really important area to be talking about.
That criticism is understood, but at the same time, for this book, I spoke to Vincent, who was the other Andy Warhol Enterprise manager with Bob and Fred.
Sure.
And he has a much more kind view of Warhol because he was, on set for most of the portraits. He was, producer on the film side, and I think when you see him speak in public, you understand that connection. There's not a sense of enmity or jealousy, or it's not a problematized. Let's say it's a less problematic relationship. And Fred being the first to go was probably maybe part of that, the difficulties of that lifestyle, which was very challenging at the time, and actually the norm. So to really kind of blame him for rampant drug usage in the 60s and 70s is kind of like absurd.
Agreed. Do you want to go back into the previous images that we can learn more about?
Yeah. That's Mary the Younger, Alex, and Cole walking to the hotel through the what will be like a very nice parking lot, and that looks up to where Alex is, just on the other side of the river. So
and again, this is in Lexington, New York.
Yeah, that's sort of like the next chapter. I don't know if this was the best narrative in the arrangement of the images, so it doesn't matter like what order they're really in. But yeah, I mean, it's one of many beautiful shots that we've all taken over the time and started to collage into a kind of a lookbook of the area, because it really is kind of a unique hamlet, and so I feel lucky that we can endeavor to do something exciting there.
Patrick and Alex, who's also here, can you some way tell us how it is we can sort of learn more or be involved more in the project in Lexington and get more access to it? Of course, Emily and I have a film that we produced that we need to edit and make available for the project from the October event, if that's useful to you. But I imagine that some people here may be curious about Lexington.
Alex, jump in. I mean, he's much more organized. He's been there for a year, and he's got a website you can direct you to learn more about what he's got cooking.
Well, I don't want to put Alex on the spot, but
no, I don't mind.
It's not Patrick's responsibility. I'm not responsible.
No, that's fine with me. I'm happy to jump in for a second, and I definitely don't want to take too much time here because this is a fantastic interview and I'm enjoying it.
Alex, though, I have to admit, I'm quite jealous of your teeth. Can you
I just brush and floss, man. That's it.
All right. Well, that's all we need to hear. During the time, we got to keep up these hygienic habits during the COVID time. So if you're
and you got to smile too, right? Because how would anybody know?
You've been rehearsing.
I practice every day. So you can learn more about what I'm doing at lexartsci.com, LEXARTSCI.com. What I'm doing is now incorporating a lot of what Patrick's doing and kind of what I was working on for a year, which is kind of the time before I met Patrick, has now grown exponentially with this edition. And now my mind encompasses both sides of the river. And now with Nancy Barton of Prattsville Art Center is encompassing 2 entire towns in terms of what we can do in terms of revitalization. And I think the second part of your question was how can people get involved? And my estimation, and Patrick's as well, I think.
Just a moment. Forgive me for interrupting. Sure. It's just a bad habit I have as an interviewer.
Please.
But tell us a little bit, if you don't mind, Alex. What's the lay of the land up there? You've got Hunter Mountain. You've got Prattsville Art Center. You've got your project in Lexington. What is the environment like up there? It's like 2.5, 3 hours away from Manhattan. There's this extraordinary exodus or diaspora away from the urban centers now since the pandemic. What's the feeling and what's the atmosphere like? And how do you see these things co-developing and co-cooking up there?
Which 2 things do you mean? You mean like the 2 projects that were, or
the lay of the land in general, and how your project sort of, dovetails or interfaces with the existing, culture, and the culture as it's changing.
Right. Okay. So I think the most fascinating thing about Lexington is how kind of little it's changed over the centuries. I think it became popularized as a resort destination in the 1880s, and it still seems as pristine now as I think it did then. I think then it probably even seemed less pristine because it was more farmed, and a lot of that has grown back in trees, and that's really the diametric difference from being in the city, and that's what is kind of most enticing. And it's, I think, the reason why people become enamored with the place once they're there. And so kind of the fact that New York City's water comes from this place is one of the reasons why it's so well preserved. And I think that the lay of the land in comparison to, I guess, as from the perspective of what we're trying to do, I think the land itself being wild affords people the opportunity to be wildly themselves and to engage in the most creative aspects of themselves. And that's how our property was used for many, many years as an art center. And I think that that's kind of the biggest draw for the future of Lexington and the larger project and what we're working on with Patrick. And I think the wildness and the freedom, really.
And a lot of people are coming upstate these days. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's true. I mean, I think though that it's a massive opportunity in terms of getting this project rolling faster, but I don't think there's many differences about the way that I or Patrick would necessarily think about things given the pandemic. It's just happening a lot faster than we would have ever imagined. That's it, right? I mean, the city and this part of the state are equally different, I think, than they were a year ago, but it's been accelerating in terms of people's desire to be up here, which is for us fascinating and an opportunity.
Okay, I just want to contextualize it for Ron Smith, who just entered the conversation. Ron, for the moment, we're just discussing the environment in upstate New York around a project that Patrick Meagher, our guest today, and Alex Rodriguez are collaborating with in some way in a little town called Lexington, which, as far as I can tell, has about 4 buildings. And it's like an extraordinarily agriculturally, historically great place. And it's near the Hunter Mountain ski resort and culture center. And there's also an art residence and art center in Prattville nearby. So,
I do know the area, and I do want to apologize for being late. I had another business appointment that I had to take care of, but I'll jump in now and look forward to the rest of the conversation.
oh, thanks, Ron. Great to see you. Yeah. So I think that we can learn more about the project through Patrick and Alex post show. But Patrick, I think perhaps you and Emily have some more material to share with us, and then we'll open up the space to other voices and minds.
Yeah, I just have a couple more plugs, which is here, or one image back. I'm in a poetry art journal that is artist organized, edited by Anna Erzum and Catherine Jackson. It's called Battery Journal. You can find the link there. It's a wonderful book. I forget how many artists are in there, 82, I think. And it's another amazing thing about publishing these days. You know, how to produce a compendium of thought of the day, and they're doing a great job. In fact, there's a version, a second volume of it currently in production. And then I'll be doing the next edition, which is 20 years of 20 essays about art that I hadn't published for one reason or another, brought together in a kind of compendium that should help kind of start to understand what 21st century art is about and how that's shaping up.
Patrick, I know you've published a number of books or catalogs, and many of them are sort of theoretic and also immersive at the same time. And that's an area of your work that we didn't really explore very much, but the way you sort of mind map things, I find very evocative and sort of, you know, in some way, yeah, I think evocative is an interesting word in terms of what it does, makes you connect these dots and see the interconnection of areas of the body, mind, social experience and mystic experience that we might not be able to wrap our arms around. And you seem to do it very well. There was a video that I noticed before in our setup, before the show, that you and Emily were reviewing. And I'm wondering if there's a context for this video that relates to the topic on the table at the moment.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this kind of goes back to some other topics, but it's a video of an artwork that's a 3-foot poster that's pinned to the wall with 4 buttons, which basically kind of outline the 4 still major problems of society today. Like sexism, racism, homophobia, queerphobia, and the xenophobia, and this is a diagram basically of how change occurs in society, which might be actually interesting to look at today, because in addition to like the problems that are right at hand, that are so urgent, from this diagram we can see that we're both in phase 1 on some problems, but we're also on phase 5 in a lot of other problems, and that this process is becoming more and more accelerated because of the internet, social media, and just our human comprehension and our interconnectivity becoming more and more apparent, how we're kind of really one organism on some level, and that's almost being scientifically understood in a broader sense.
How do we see this video? Where is it? What is the venue, so to speak?
I mean, this was living online. It's an older work, but I wanted to bring it out for the context of this show, for your activist. I made it for an activist friend, and then it was in a show at an art space in Nolita that another friend had organized, which was in an old schoolhouse. So I thought it was appropriate to have a kind of scholastic or instructional video in the schoolhouse that also related to the art and activism of the organization that had put the show together. So this was just like on looping on an old television in a schoolroom, but it's also part of a diagrammatic set of works that I've been doing that help us think about the information age and how to understand large shifts in the human scape. So there's that logical part of my brain that does diagrams, and then the other part is this is the poetry, and this was something.
Well, if you don't mind me adding a comment and a question, Patrick, it seems as though you have a sort of capacity to deconstruct these complex interconnected systems socially and internally, both in the world and in the inner human experience. Do you have a way of describing that process of deconstruction and analyzing? Is that part of your working method? Or is it something that you just go to occasionally?
I mean, it's not exactly decon, as it is like kind of picking things apart, but also trying to simplify things as they are. So with like the Fifth Dimensional book, that's basically like a distillation of about 24 books onto onto a page, using the same diagram as a kind of rubric for understanding what the concept of the book is. And
there we have another one of those images, right?
Yeah. So this was the original one. It's based on a book with the ABCDE, and then I added the E and changed learning to comprehend so that it fits the English alphabet, and this became like a jumping off point to look at other things that like had maybe 4 parts, and then understand maybe the 5th part would be, and use it as a conceptual rubric or like way of playing with ideas, and then bringing in information from sources as wide as psychology to physics to various ancient religions, and seeing how, in a way, the internet helps us overlay these belief systems and knowledge sets, and shows us, in a sense, that just as with interreligious studies that my uncle had been doing, that there is also major sets of both medical, philosophical, and psychological understandings that are maybe spoken about from different angles, from different environments, from different landscapes, but ultimately start to paint a portrait of the human condition, which is a much more unified understanding of consciousness.
So, Patrick, in your understanding of art history and your own personal experience, does it seem common or uncommon that artists somehow engage in questions and pursuits of mysticism, and how mysticism then is sort of informing their work as social creatures and artists? Is this something that you're, for example, I mentioned it in previous shows. One of my sort of chosen icons, mostly as I was introduced to art history, was to Marcel Duchamp, who I know through a friend of ours written a book, Jackie Bass. Duchamp was a student of tantric yoga, and was part of a very lively community of spiritualists and artists involved with mysticism in Europe and Paris particularly. Do you feel that you're occupying a similar space in terms of these different kinds of disciplines?
I hope so. Those are big shoes to fill, but yeah, I see Duchamp and Warhol and Beuys as proponents of fifth dimensional awareness, which sounds like total hooey when you first hear it. But then when you look at the history of art, you realize that the meta version of art has always been dimensional awareness and expansion of human consciousness. There's a Swiss philosopher, Jean Gebser, who made a very easy point of reference for Western art, at least, which was that basically, but in medieval art, we had a sort of flat 2D landscape that started becoming more and more 3D. By the Renaissance, we really explored the idea of dimension of space and understood the world as a globe, right? This is a major breakthrough for human understanding. And subsequently, we have the Cubism, Futurism, Surrealism, for better or for worse, who talk about time and explore that in its various dimensions. And shortly after that, Duchamp is the first jumping off point from Cubism, and he starts looking into peering through the étant donné into the, again, in the interior world, which is a seemingly surrealistic piece, but it actually seems to look more at the intentional realm of what is loosely called the fifth dimension. And it's such a fuzzy subject. I wrote a book about it, but basically try to distill it into one page to keep it simple, because there's so many books that were actually just very quite bloated and long and unparsable.
Our friend Marriott Sheldon, who is temporarily our neighbor in North Carolina while we're here for the next 2 weeks. The other day, Marriott was mentioning, and by the way, here's another program process moment. We seem to have organically moved into including other people in the conversation, Patrick. And you very graciously accommodated these interventions in your talk, and Emily and I appreciate that. But Marriott the other day was speaking about fifth dimension or sixth dimension, Marriott, and I can't recall what the context was, but perhaps you have something that you can, contribute to this conversation, because I wasn't quite clear what you were getting at, Marriott, and here it is again with Patrick.
Hi, Patrick. Thank you so much, and John and Emily. Yeah, I'm excited to hear you talk about the fifth dimension, and I'm learning about this concept right now, but it really makes sense to me. And the way I see it is it's about consciousness and what humans are moving toward, ideally. And I think that your graph showing, the progression towards enlightenment, it's just another way to talk about the goal of enlightenment. The fifth dimension is just, it's just a way of explaining or understanding that process. So it's just language, but also the idea for me about enlightening our consciousness towards this way of thinking about, the big picture.
Why was it that you mentioned it the other day, Marriott? Excuse me for interrupting Patrick if you were going to comment. It also helps when I say something that it also perhaps gives the speaker an opportunity to reflect a little bit, and that's my sort of excuse for interrupting. But if you know what I mean. Marriott, what was it the other day you were speaking about this with us, something related to what Emily and I are doing or what you're doing? I couldn't get the context of it. Help me make a bridge, maybe also, references what Patrick is doing.
I think it probably had to do with your program and how excited I am that you are producing this Tuning Fork program, because I think it's incredibly important and powerful for people to talk about ideas and, you know, through artists' interpretations, and also science. So the, you know, science and art and philosophy, cultural activism incorporates and integrates all of those ideals. So I think I was talking in terms of your program and how exciting it is to be able to gather with people, creative people, to talk about what's possible.
So when you talk about the fifth dimension, Mariette, as though people are sort of commonly using this expression, some people, how is it that you understand it?
I understand it as an awakening. It's an awakening that is happening if we can be aware of it. And then if we become aware of the awakening in ourselves and in society and in culture, and as this grows, it's important to be able to frame it.
So you're saying, if I understand it correctly, if I don't mind me reframing it, that the topic of enlightenment, in this case, which has many possible meanings, and Gordon Skinner has a comment to make too, but am I understanding it correctly that that experience as a process or a reality or whatever is becoming somehow a thread in the art experience, in activism, cultural activism, that consciousness itself as an identifiable material is on the table? Is that what I get? And are you and Patrick, are we going somewhere here, Patrick? Is that
and it goes with technology too. Like this very forum is an intermediate medium out of like time-based media, right? Because it's not a recording, it's a live interaction. We have is like telepresence. And when we start to get into the VR world and using avatars, that will be called 5D media. Like 4D media is all recorded visual media, movies. And the preeminent media of the 20th century was 4D media, and the preeminent media of the 21st century will be 5D media. So having these interactions here where people are in different places interacting in the same forum is the bridge to that new layer of virtual reality that's undergoing.
So are we saying here that in contrast to how social media and the digital age can have its sort of downside, that this upside aspect of it is such that it is an area of a discipline, a virtual discipline, a space that can in some way catalyze the experience of the fifth dimension. And I wonder, Patrick, if we're going in that direction, the adapting of this technology to this purpose, we didn't yet talk about Walter's Cube and the potential that virtual space and experience can act as one of these tools of expanding this sensibility of, as Mariette articulates it, as consciousness.
Yeah. And it's great. I don't know if Balazs is still here. He's the founder of Walter's Cube, and we've had at length discussions about this. We've like made diagrams together. I've watched him go through his epiphanies about understanding what the project is and what his inspirations were and what our shared understandings were from the VR work that I did in the late 90s and early 2000 at the New Museum and other museums. That impetus was understood then as a kind of a framework, and now we're starting to live into it. And then along with the technological counterpoint, there's also, the energetic learnings that you were talking about earlier with like that Duchamp was exploring at the time with what can be done with sheer breathing without any use of entheogens or other substances that can accelerate that mindset shift.
Did you say breathing, Patrick?
Breathing, yeah.
Yeah, it was one of Duchamp's main disciplines and daily practices was to wake up and really breathe, and that was one of his sort of tantric exercises and tools. And as I understood it, yeah, very powerful.
Well, specifically ocean breath, which is a yogic way of connecting the internal space of the lung to the external kind of reality and activating the chakras in total, which again sounds like complete bullshit unless you have a point of reference. But but I mean, I've had out of body experiences strictly from ocean breath.
Wait, don't you need a permit for that?
Yeah, you know, it's a bit of a wild west. But
I was just noticing this really cool thing is that, you know, this triangular window here that frames the ocean in the background here as a sort of, you know, mandala perhaps of some kind, you know. Now, by the way, we are coming to the conventional close of our show, and Gordon, who will also be on the show in a few weeks, had his hand up before, and I'm really excited to hear, as I'm sure Emily and everyone is, to hear from Gordon. And then
also Daniel is on. And
yeah, Daniel. Hey, Daniel.
He's one of our mutual friends and also colleagues with Balazs on Walter's Cube, and he's actually
Daniel,
one of the best experts I know on these things.
Yeah, and Daniel and I also interface in the you know, Asian studies of Tibetan Buddhism, and you know, we're all part of this downtown community of artists who are perhaps working in that fifth dimension that Emily and you know, we've been discussing with Marriott the last few days. So let's give the floor to Gordon for a moment, and perhaps Daniel and Balazs want to contribute, or Ron, I don't know. We have to manage this very carefully. We don't want to step on anybody's toes. Virtually.
Thank you for this, and thank you, Patrick. You know, first, the comment to John is that I had the great good fortune of having Marcel as a mentor. However, the problem was that he spoke too much.
The French.
It wasn't really discernible what language he was speaking, but we kept telling him, you know, you really talk too much.
Yeah, like tone it down. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, like, you know, go back to your profession.
But did he seriously talk a lot?
No. Well, not to me, you know, at least he spoke in a whisper, because when I started having conversations with him, it was usually by way of a Ouija board.
Right.
Yeah. Because he was dead.
Well, thanks.
I just wanted to share. But Patrick, on a serious note, I actually I've been in conversations about actually doing a documentary on Andy Warhol's mannequins, which I was you know, I mean, you know, not to mention, you know, the enormous price point for each one of these mannequins. It was just amazing, and to be surrounded by this artwork. But you know, growing up, you know, Basquiat and I are the same age, and you know, we're definitely moving in similar circles. I grew up in Lower Manhattan, actually in Chelsea, and you know, was definitely part of the whole danceteria and, you know, Mud Club and all of that, you know, little enclave. But the question is that, you know, for me, you know, Warhol was and is still somewhat an enigma to me. And I wondered if there were certain nuanced aspects of him and his life that you might have been able to come to understand and could provide, sans any specific threshold or context?
In 10 seconds.
Yes, the elevator pitch.
Yeah, it depends how many floors, Gordon.
Yeah,
Five floors, elevator pitch.
5 floors down.
That summarizes my entire book, but and then no one has a reason to buy it. But it's actually meant to be a really, really portable short book, so the least words possible.
With notes.
I agree with you. Is it would be a great trend if we could just keep it simple, right? That's like the business 101. But I'll just read you the table of contents, and then if there's something you I can speak more to, let me know. So it's number 1 is an American departure from Eurocentric art. Number 2, imagining Hollywood as a social model, American aristocracy. Number 3, embracing the othered, misfits, weirdos, eccentrics at the factory. Number 4, going out on a ledge in the art world. That's about queerness. Number 5, queering cinema and underground film. Number 6, from jet set internationalism to globalism and globalization. Number 7, democratizing art, prints to the people. Number 8, early Amiga and Macintosh digital art and multimedia. Number 9, artist as social chronicler and collaborator, including a lot of things that we know him for, most famously the Basquiat collaborations. That's basically what that one's about. And number 10, the artist as producer and publisher, as an independent kind of free of that superstructure of publishing. Number 11, the beauty of business art, which is a kind of a further chapter in that now we have this whole fifth estate of people who live and from the web, from their own words and from their own antics, maybe, for better or for worse. And then 12, legacy, giving back to art before and after his death. People forget that he endowed Creative Capital, was one of the largest charities for art. And if you look up creativecapital.org, you'll see all kinds of stuff, great stuff they do for art writing, visual art. They have fellows every year who they help usher from young artist state to like fully functioning, empowered businesses. And that is one of like the most amazing things. We've all like kind of struggled with like, how do we like bring our work to the people and how do we help each other grow? And they've been like a background for that.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I'm actually dealing with Creative Capital on something entirely different and had no knowledge of that. I was thought that his I don't want to say it's philanthropic, but what he left as a legacy was the Andy Warhol Foundation, and I knew a past president there. But I wonder, to answer your question about what I would think specifically, I wonder, are you looking at it from the standpoint chronologically? Is it, and there, so I can answer the question, if because it would seem that chapter 6 gives rise to chapter 9.
Yeah. Good point. It's not exactly chronological. I think I had to kind of put things around in order to make that thread compress like a Wikipedia page. But that was sort of the inspiration. Like, what can we get from a Wikipedia page that isn't all about the typical things about Warhol's iconography, the fame, the fabulousness, is the fatalities, and the dark side of that, the whole factory. And this was like, okay, well, at the same time, we maybe take for granted the whole other part that that basically within the urban fabric, he was creating like a free space for people to be who they are, and that safe space when at the time. I mean, you guys know New York, like I grew up there, but I was still like, I never got to meet him, but and now I'm like fortunate to live right around in a Warhol building right around the corner from where Basquiat was. But these were our heroes. Like, Futura 2000 did a show around the corner on Great Jones just last month, and I had the pleasure of meeting Lenny 15 years ago, and hearing more about that time in the city. But that generation were the inspiration for I mean, a legion of American artists or people around the world. It's just sort of like it's like the hip hop of art. It just kind of went everywhere. And I think it was because he was, you know, an open and engaged person that you know, he made superstars out of all the fabulous people that found their way to get to know each other. And he just, you know, put the camera on it. He showed a light on something that was already there. But helping to illuminate that, you know, he got a lot of credit for that illumination. But it's actually a whole ecosystem. And I was hoping that at one point we'd be able to turn this 15 minutes into a series and produce a book on about, I think I identified 20 people at the factory who could have their own book, because they're less documented players who nevertheless really shaped the environment.
He also had a significant impact in fashion. I mean, as illustrated in Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point. I mean, because of Warhol and Calvin Klein wearing, of all things, hush puppy shoes to art openings, you know, a company that was, you know, ringing its death knell, you know, in a very slow but, you know, modest descent, you know, then had this immediate upsurge where they couldn't even find enough pair globally, and then gave them another 10 years of significant profit because everybody ran out and started buying hush puppies thanks to Andy and Klein. So yeah, but thank you for sharing this, and I'm definitely interested and eager to read your material.
Yeah, it's not published yet, but I'll send you a pre-published PDF, so maybe we can talk about this. That'd be awesome. Thank you.
Definitely, thank you.
Can't tell you how ecstatic it is for me to be hanging out with everyone and talking about these really vibrant, vital things. And really glad to see Daniel here tonight. And I hope that we'll all be able to continue working in some manner together, not only in the fifth dimension, but toward the fifth dimension, you know. Emily, are we about to wrap things up? How are you? What do you feel about, I want to know also from Patrick, how do you think we're doing, Patrick? How's this going for you?
That's great. I mean, I'm out of coffee and water, so. Emily? Oh,
she's muted.
Oh yeah.
Thank
you so much. I had a great time. Thanks everybody for showing up and pitching in, and you know, hopefully we'll have continuations of this discussion elsewhere, and I look forward to that in the next week too.
I might just interject one thing if there's a moment.
It's about time, Daniel Subikov. About time.
I just thought I'd share a family element about Warhol that you guys might not know. But my dad is retired now, but he was an antique dealer and for a big chunk of his life had a store in downtown New York City. And Warhol was one of his customers, like a regular customer of his, because Warhol, I don't think he liked to decorate with modern furniture or art much. He liked antiques, interestingly enough. And at one point he offered to trade my dad some of his art for antiques. And to this day, my dad regrets he was like, no, I'm not interested.
When I went to Warhol's studio, I was 15 years old, and it was at that time the factory. I think it was the second factory. It was on Union Square West, between 16th and 17th, about one building north of 16th Street. And I went up.
What year was that, John?
Oh,
Roughly?
It was 71.
Okay.
And since you mentioned this sort of decorative sort of topic, I couldn't help but notice on the way in that there were two huge stuffed Great Danes at the doorway into the studio. It was pretty intense. So whatever he was doing seemed to have so much intention, saturated intention. Like it wasn't sort of random what this guy was up to. He was a real, I think he was pretty clear and deliberate about his work and all those things. I'm sorry we didn't get to talk more with John Giorno about Andy while John was still alive. They were intimate friends, and here we are sort of standing on their shoulders somehow as cultural activists. Your sister's also an interesting activist, Daniel, and I hope we'll be able to have her part of our show one of these days.
You too, Daniel. Now you're roped in.
Yeah. Anyway, keep her in your thoughts and positive intentions, because she's fighting COVID right now.
Oh man.
Yeah.
We'll turn on the faucet, man, for sure. And we're really sorry about that. It's heartbreaking. Sorry. And Emily and I apologize for not connecting with you and Natalie the other night on Sunday, but we had.
Oh yeah, I mean,
we had a little bit of a crisis that had to do with a dog that needed to be rescued in Long Island, and I won't go any further into that because it's really forbidden to speak more about it at this point. So apologies, and I hope we can connect with you guys soon.
Yeah, we'll reschedule.
Yeah. So friends, another invigorating tuning fork experience, and we're just so grateful. As the day gets darker, we're reminded perhaps that one of these great things that Martin Luther King said during his speech in 1968, the day before he was murdered, he said that as something like this, as it gets easier to see the stars as things get darker. So pretty intense, and what a speech. We heard it yesterday on his birthday, official birthday, on Democracy Now! I never listened to the speech in its entirety, but it's just amazing. Really spiritual nourishing. Pia, do you know Daniel?
Kind of.
Okay.
I know your sister a little bit.
Right. And Pia's going to be on the show. Tell us a bit, just to sort of say goodnight, Pia. By the way, do you actually know Patrick? And one day when Emily and I were bringing Patrick upstate for a meeting, I kept telling him, you have to go to Andes, New York. You have to go. And we were driving up the New York Thruway. He said, oh, you have to go west on 17. And I said, are you sure? He said, yeah. I said, well, do you know where it is exactly we're going? And he said, oh, it's Andes, New York. So Emily and I were sort of amazed by that. But tell us a little bit about give us a little head start on your show and what it is you're doing up there that we're going to talk about during your live broadcast.
I'm actually right now in my working process, and I'm not a really good talker. That's why I actually,
we can't talk about it, I guess, right? No.
Oh, okay. So no, but in general, I'm not a really good talker, so that's why I'm not jumping in this tuning fork right now. And but yeah, so I'm actually working on this project, which I did last year in the summer of August. No, actually it was 2 years ago. I'm just confused with time right now. But
who isn't? It's called COVID time.
It's called COVID time.
It's all different.
And I actually gathered about 28 women from Delaware County around a waterfall, and they are all naked. And so I did this photo shoot with a photographer, and so we were able to capture a really great image. And so I'm in the process of now painting these really powerful women. And so I do sketches, and and I will have this show at the Roxbury Arts Group in the Performance Center, because they have a really big space back there. And so so I'm doing a painting which is like about I think it's 7 by 14 feet, and that will be shown in this on the stage, along with some photos and with some sketches, yeah, and with the whole process. So yeah.
Thank you, Pia.
While I'm in this process, I'm not a big talker about things. So when actually everything is up, I can just talk about it. But
yeah.
So.
Yep, you're in that space, and we're relying on you to create something very meaningful for everybody and activating for everyone. We're really, I mean, it's very exciting. And thank you.
It would be great if I can also involve, I would like involve my other projects I have done over the last years. So, so it will take time to put everything together and to do properly, and not just like, hey, let's do it.
Thank you, Pia. That's great. See you soon, everyone. And Emily and I we sing together at the end of the show, and you're all welcome to sing with us. It's a song that many of us know from childhood. Ready, Em?
Okay. Thanks, Patrick, very much.
Thanks,
Patrick.
Guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Patrick. This is great. It was really good. I was enjoying it.
Thanks, Patrick. Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep shining on till then. Okay. Good night from us on the Nomadic Institute for Cultural Activism tuning fork. Have fun.
Wonderful.